How do criminals from a small country in the Balkans establish themselves among the most dominant players in European transnational organised crime? It's a story of ruthless violence, opportunism, savvy networking and business acumen, and it's a story that's taken the Albanian Mafia from humble beginnings to becoming major players in the trafficking of arms, narcotics and people, and playing a significant role in organised crime across Europe and Latin America. But how do we get here? Let's take a look at how Albanian organised crime first began to establish itself. And to do that, it means taking a look at a period of significant instability and turmoil in Albania. So let's start with the 1990s and the fall of communism in Albania. So for more than 40 years, Albania was under communist rule defined by the Stalinist regime of Enver Hoxha. Now, Albania at this time has been described as the North Korea of Europe, so it was incredibly isolationist. It was very difficult to get in or out of the country except on official government business. So when communism comes to an end in 1991, we've got this transition period from one form of government to becoming a market economy, with the borders opening up and a period of significant change and, again, instability and turmoil. So with this comes the infiltration of weak institutions by organised crime. We've got the disintegration of the communist secret service. That leads to around 2/3 of secret service agents losing their jobs and in need of a new form of income. And with this transition to a new form of economy, it also creates a lot of opportunities for organised criminals to start making money on the black market through the smuggling of goods such as cigarettes, oil, and eventually the trafficking of people and narcotics as well. So this is actually something that Secret Service workers are pretty adept at already. So from the 1960s, there had reportedly been a special unit created which was smuggling cigarettes working directly with the Italian Mafia. Of course, when communism comes to an end, a lot of former Secret Service agents are becoming more and more involved in organised crime, but it's not just former Secret Service agents and former members of the Republican Guard, it's people from all walks of life finding whatever ways they can to start making money. Because of the connection that these people have with the corridors of power, then we're getting organised crime becoming established within the government itself, within the levers of power, and this only starts to grow over time. So in the early to mid-90s, we've got the wars in Yugoslavia, and sanctions are placed on Yugoslavia, so that again creates opportunity for organised crime. We've got the smuggling of oil across borders, but we've also got the diversion of heroin routes. So reportedly around about 75% of heroin coming from the Middle East and through Turkey was trafficked through Serbia and then Croatia. With the wars in Yugoslavia, this then starts to divert towards Albania. So we've got this establishment of new routes along the trafficking of narcotics as well. So beyond the fall of communism, around about early 1997, there is another period of huge turmoil and instability in Albania. This is the collapse of pyramid schemes. So by the start of 1997, around $1.5 billion has been invested in pyramid schemes in Albania, and that's around about half of the country's GDP, and apparently 2/3 of the country's population had money invested in these schemes. So around about $500 to $800 million are withdrawn from these pyramid schemes at the start of 1997, and these schemes begin to collapse, and with them comes the Albanian economy. With the economy comes the state itself, really. There's a complete collapse of law and order. There's massive unrest within the country. People begin looting arms depots, and in large parts of the country, the state doesn't really have any sort of presence or authority. So in southern Albania especially, there are a lot of armed gangs who are filling the power vacuum left behind by the state. These armed gangs are fighting amongst each other for control of different areas of different towns, such as the port city of Vlora. In the north, people are also beginning to lose faith in the state's ability to provide law and order. So this leads to the revival of a tribal law known as the Kanun. So as part of the Kanun is the idea of blood feuds. So this can be broken down into two different types of blood feud. There's the Hakmaya, which is a type of vendetta, and then there's the Yakmaya, which is a blood feud. And this is a form of rudimentary mutually assured destruction in order to discourage crimes such as murder. The vendetta essentially is something that we're probably pretty familiar with, an eye for an eye, whereas the Yakimara is an eye for an eye for an eye for an eye across multiple generations between families. So if someone, for instance, murders your brother, then that you are entitled to commit retribution against other family members of that person as well as on that person themselves. So with that revival of the Kanun, this starts to get mixed in with the increasingly violent organised crime within the country. So in 1997, we've got the real establishment of organised armed gangs running large parts of the country. We've got the idea of blood feuds becoming more and more part of everyday life in certain parts of the country. We've also, as I mentioned, had people looting the armories across the country. So that led to around between 500,000 to 600,000 weapons being looted, including around 225,000 Kalashnikovs. So you can see this is a recipe for quite widespread violence and disorder. And organised crime at this moment in time is beginning to establish a reputation for quite serious violence. So for example, one incident that occurred in 1997 was a gang leader called Alfred Shkurti, also known as Aldo Bare. He decapitated one of his rivals, paraded his head across town, and was responsible for the shootings, bombings and killings of multiple people, including police officers and other members of the state. And this is a reputation that they continue to develop over the next few years. So by the mid-noughties, a lot of reports are highlighting Albanian organised crime as being a lot more willing to commit violence than many other organised crime groups.
Get in-depth insight on the activities of Albanian organised crime. Transnational organised crime is one of the biggest threats to security in Europe today, and the Albanian Mafia is one of the most significant organised crime groups on the continent. Using open source reporting and data from the Intelligence Fusion Threat Intelligence platform, we'll be releasing a comprehensive report on the state of Albanian organised crime groups and their impact on global security. Sign up now to receive the report as soon as it's released. Click the link in the description below.
By mid-1997, around about June, there are elections that sort of stabilise the country a bit more. But by this time, organised crime has really become an established part of life in Albania. And it's occurring at a time of mass emigration as well. So with any form of mass migration, there is a minority criminal element to it. So we do have criminals coming from Albania and establishing themselves in other countries across Europe, but also creates a lot of vulnerable people who these organised crime gangs can exploit, and also exposes vulnerabilities within the systems of the countries that they are moving to, which again, these gangs are able to exploit. And in 1998, 1999, there is another humanitarian crisis which begins to be exploited by organised crime, and that is the war in Kosovo. So with the mass proliferation of arms in Albania and the ethnic Albanian cause in Kosovo, there's the establishment of a significant arms trafficking trade between organised crime gangs in Albania and the Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo. And these gangs also start to form a arms for heroin trade with the Italian Mafia. There's also mass emigration from Kosovo into Albania itself, and beyond that there is a large amount of Kosovan refugees who are being granted asylum across Europe and the rest of the world. And there's evidence that a lot of Albanians seeking to move from Albania to other parts of the world are claiming to be Kosovan and are receiving asylum a lot more readily than they would do had they applied for asylum as an Albanian national. And again, this is something that's being exploited by organised crime groups, especially those involved in sex trafficking.
Traffickers, they say to the woman, you have to tell to the ministry that you are from Kosovo, so you will get the refugee status in Belgium.
So this sort of highlights the next aspect of Albanian organised crime, and that it's starting to become a lot more transnational. And this, in part, is aided by the geographical location of Albania itself. It's located on established smuggling routes, especially the Balkan route for heroin trade. So to the east, you've got Turkey, which is connected to heroin and opium coming from the Middle East. That's trafficked through Turkey and eventually makes its way into Albania, where it's purchased from Turkish groups by Albanian gangs and then distributed on into Europe. To the north, you've got a very porous border with other Balkan states such as Montenegro, Serbia and what would become Kosovo. To the west, you've got Italy across the Adriatic Sea and the Ionian Sea, which is becoming a very popular route for trafficking as well. And then to the south, you've got a direct land border with Greece, which is an EU country. So again, the countries that surround Albania place it on a prime location for establishing yourself as a trafficker in arms, in people, or in narcotics. This is a time where the Albanian diaspora is really spreading across Europe. Alongside the establishment of quite violent organised crime within Albania itself. And what does this mean? Well, it means that in other countries we are beginning to see Albanian criminals becoming involved in organised crime in those countries too. We've mentioned the trafficking of drugs from Albania into Italy, cigarette smuggling as well, with links going back to the 1960s. We've also got Albanian criminals being drafted into these groups directly within their host countries. So groups such as the Ndrangheta in Calabria are employing, for lack of a better word, Albanian nationals as part of their operations. We've mentioned that they're developing links with Turkish groups trafficking heroin from the Middle East into Albania and then selling that on to other groups across Western Europe. There's also the establishment of an arms trade. The Balkans in general is a key source of weaponry for organised crime groups across Western Europe, and there are actually reports that members of the Ndrangheta are actually moving to Balkan countries to act as brokers in the arms trade. And this is a time where you can purchase a Kalashnikov for as little as $300 from these countries. So you can see how this is becoming an established trade. It's also becoming a key source country for sex trafficking. So we mentioned the human trafficking element. Between 1997 and 2001 is really the sort of peak era for Albanian sex trafficking into Western Europe. We've got people being forced to work as prostitutes in countries such as Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy and the UK. And in the 1990s, we've also got the major planting of cannabis across the country. So Albania quickly grows to become a major source country for marijuana trafficked across Europe. So Albanian groups have already started to work quite closely with other major organised crime groups at the end of the 90s, start of the 2000s. So how has this led to Albanian groups becoming one of the most dominant players in transnational organised crime? Over the coming episodes, we'll explore how the Albanian Mafia has taken their business international and established themselves as major players in the trafficking of people, of cocaine, marijuana, and more. We'll be covering everything from the range of countries that they work in and the local groups that they work with, the illicit trades they've mastered and their reputation for violence, and how law enforcement has attempted to clamp down on their operations. How did the Albanian Mafia go international?